everybody, and welcome to the NFL Goal Line. Thank you for joining us, as always, on Monday night. I'm Phil Nunziata. Alongside, of course, is the man of the hour, Nick Rice, and we got a lot to talk about. There's been a lot of speculation. Is this year's version of the Chicago Bears defense the best defense of all time? We know the Chiefs are bad, but how bad are they really? A team that is yet to have a lead in regulation this year. That's pretty bad. On top of that, if they do indeed get the first pick in the NFL draft, who should they go after? We'll discuss that in our Facebook question, and I will give you my top 5 coaches that could perhaps make the jump from the college level to the NFL. All this and more next on NFL Goal Line.
Welcome inside the NFL Goal Line studios. As Phil mentioned, I am Nick Rice. Welcome inside the Spreaker.com studios as well. We are live on that site on the NFL Goal Line on National Sports. I'm Nick Rice, and we have a lot to get to, and let's not waste any time. This is the Monday night. We typically, right at this time, get into the Monday night battle in New Orleans. We have a very interesting scenario here as there's a team that's blowing the Philadelphia Eagles right out of the door. Phil, what do you have for us?
Well, it seems that things are going just as bad as they've been for the past few weeks. For the Philadelphia Eagles, Michael Vick throwing a pick 6 in the red zone to Patrick Robinson. The Saints have tacked on 2 touchdowns since then. The Eagles have been in the red zone 3 times and have only mustered out 3 points. The Saints coming into halftime here, got 20 seconds left in the half, and the Saints are dominating this one 21-3.
And it looks like there is a mini drive going. I don't know if that'll result in any points, but New Orleans leading 21-3, and if anything is going from bad to worse, it's your all-star LaShawn McCoy with only 12 carries in one half. He has over 10 yards a carry. Why are they not giving him the football more? I've been scratching my head all year on that decision. Maybe some injury concerns, but if LaShawn McCoy is your go-to man, why only give it to him 12 times in one half when you need this game to keep afloat in the NFC East?
Well, the frustrating thing is that LaShawn McCoy has made the best of those 12 carries, having over 100 yards rushing in this first half. He was stopped inside the 5 2 times, which could have easily resulted in touchdowns, and this is a completely different football game at that point. So he's actually running rampant on the Saints defense. They're stopping him short and making them convert in the red zone, which is something the Eagles have not been very good at all season.
New Orleans very impressive, especially on the defensive side. Only a field goal mustered out in the entire first half by this Eagles offense. Same kind of scenario with the defensive battle between the Giants and the Steelers in the most intriguing matchup of week number 9 by far and away. No one expected, including me. Now, I know the Giants struggle at home, and certainly in the second half, things unraveled, especially in the fourth quarter. But this city, after the Hurricane Sandy dilemma, things were really tough on this team during the past couple days. They went into this one very fired up. Their defense was able to keep the Steelers to 10 points till the fourth, and the Giants seemed to pull away. But in that final quarter, things unraveled. And starting in the second half, New York, the Steelers are a ground and pound team, but they just could not stop this team from getting it into the end zone on the ground during the fourth quarter. What's very concerning is this, what seemed to be very elite defense in the Giants starting to question their toughness, especially towards the end of the game. 14 points in the final waning seconds of the game. Certainly not going to give the Giants any sort of hope for next week. What to make of the Giants, Phil, heading into what seems to be a 6-3 start? Things are struggling right now for the Giants, losing a big one at home.
Well, this was definitely a very emotional moment. I can speak personally. I have many relatives, many cousins living in New York, and I actually had 3 of them go to this game. They were able to find some tickets that people sold for whatever reason, not thinking they can make it to the game with everything going on. So they got tickets relatively cheap, as cheap as things go in New York anyway. And they went to this game, and I've talked to them about it, and it was just a very emotional time. It was, used as an escape to everything that's happened with Hurricane Sandy and all the situations going there. People think that it was the Giants, that have a big disadvantage going into this game, but really both teams had disadvantages separately. The Steelers had to fly into New York, and the same day as the game, they got a pregame meal, then went to the stadium, played the game, and flew right back out because the state and city of New York did not have the room to accommodate these players and their staff So it was definitely throws off the groove of both teams. I don't know any team in the NFL that flies into a city, plays a game, and leaves all in one day. That sounds like something you do in college or high school. So just a very interesting game. Both teams having to deal with their share of off-the-field struggles before even taking kickoff, and the Steelers were able to come out with the win.
And Eli Manning, very pedestrian statistics in this football game. I know the Giants seem to be a different football team at home, but there's no excuse for 10 out of 24 passing, not being able to find the end zone. The defense could not stop the Steelers' attack for 4 quarters, as in the end, Redmond and this football team carried over. And what's also concerning is the Giants offensively very one-dimensional, and even the passing game didn't work, as Ahmad Bradshaw was under 3 yards a carry, and not much else doing with with also Andre Brown carrying the football as well for the Giants. Things are unraveling for the Giants. Sure, it's a very emotional game, and to, after a hurricane, host what is a very emotional 4 quarters and carry that throughout, very difficult situation. And I give, my hats off to the Giants for at least being in this game. The Steelers are a tough opponent, but in the end, what to make of the concerns for the Giants? Is this team one-dimensional? Because in this game, Ahmad Bradshaw, there was nothing doing, and this offensive line found no holes for either running back.
Well, I think that might have been what happened is this team was turned into one-dimensional. This is usually a team that, could beat you in many different ways, defense, running game, passing game, and have some of the most dynamic receivers in Victor Cruz and Akeem Nicks, and even some of their lesser-known receivers have carried the weight when need be. So I think maybe the Steelers have just issued out the blueprint to beating the Giants, if you will. Take away that running game. Make Eli be this franchise quarterback that everybody's proclaiming that he is. Make him beat you with his arm. Make Eli do everything. Make him be this elite quarterback that everyone is proclaiming for him to be. And maybe that is the key to beating the Giants, is making Eli be this superhuman.
And the Steelers ran a 2-man under the entire game, and it seemed to shut down this offense. If it weren't for the defense creating some points, this would be a very different game, as the Steelers seemed to run away with this one, but their own turnovers kept it close. Now the Giants have to take on the Cincinnati Bengals in Cincinnati. They're 6-3 now, but they could go in their bye. The Bengals had a big-time loss as well. We'll get to that later. But if the Giants don't get things together on the road, they could go into their bye after a 6-2 start on a 2-game skid and have to face the Packers in Week 12. Very tough scenario for the Giants, who right now, despite top 10 in offense and defensive statistics, things are not looking so hot, and it seems like Tom Coughlin and his squad, there's finally a way to beat the New York Giants. Now, let's not get ahead of ourselves. The Steelers are a great team. Let's go over to Pittsburgh's side, because at one point, the Steelers were not even marked down as a playoff team, but in a very weak conference, Phil, and in a very somewhat weak division now that the Ravens are struggling. How good are the Pittsburgh Steelers? They seem to be going on a roll, and right now, after a 3-game winning streak and a very easy next 3 games as well, Kansas City, Baltimore, and Cleveland respectively, how good are the Steelers, the ground and pound team that can play defense? Sure, that's not a dimension now that a lot of teams have, but as long as they're winning games, the Steelers should be a team to reckon with.
Well, I think the Steelers will be a playoff team, if for no other reason than to be the beneficiary of, as you said, a weak conference, a weak division, and more importantly, a weak schedule in these closing weeks, the second half of their season. You just named off 3 very winnable games. Of course, Baltimore is always going to be a war. But let's say they win 2 of those 3. It'll definitely heat them up. It'll put them in a similar situation with the Giants. The Giants, people say are in trouble after losing this game. They would be in bigger trouble if the Eagles or the Cowboys or even the Redskins were piling up these wins and chasing them. If Philadelphia is able to come back in this game, they would only be a game behind, so then things would really heat up, and that would make it very interesting. But for now, both of these teams are running unopposed and still tripping up while they're out ahead.
Well, right now in the AFC North, the Steelers are only 1 game back, and if the playoffs started today, the Patriots, Ravens, Texans, and Broncos would take care of the divisional leads, seeds 1 through 4. But in the playoff picture of the AFC, it's the Steelers and the Colts at 5 and 3. No one had Indianapolis winning more than 3 or 4 games this year, but Andrew Luck has turned that team around. We'll get to that later. But also just a very intriguing point. The Steelers are on the turnaround. They have a three-game winning streak, and at least 2 out of 3, as you mentioned, very winnable. Then just reading off the schedule, they close out with, outside of a trip to Baltimore, very easy. Chargers at home, Cowboys on the road, then the Bengals and the Browns both at home to round out the Steelers' schedule. If the Steelers win 4 or 5 of those games, even 4 to get 9 and 7, I'm not hard pressed to believe that the Steelers could make a wild card push. A very weak conference, and even the teams that are 5 and 3 and 4 and 4 in the conference are teams like the Chargers and the Jets. They could win 7 games and be in the race for the wild card spot. The Steelers are in a very good situation with a very easy schedule. Watch out for Pittsburgh. They're going hot, and as long as they can run the football, we'll see them at least with a number 5 seed.
Yeah, I think it's a situation. There's so many teams, as you said, you could have 7 wins and be a viable playoff option at the end of the year, because seems to be one of those years where all the teams in the middle are kind of lumped together. There's not a lot of teams separating themselves from the pack. Not yet, anyway. Of course, we're only at the halfway point. But I think that, I think I've said this the past few weeks, this always makes for more entertaining football when you don't have teams that have 1 or 2 losses. This is one of the few years, other than Atlanta, which still no one is really talking about as going undefeated, which I think it's at this point it's starting to become something that should at least be respected and talked about. But you don't have teams on both ends of the spectrum. You don't have 2 teams at 8-0 and 2 of them at 2 and 6 or 1 and 7. Everything is a little bit closer, and it's going to make everything tighter going down this second half of the season.
And just on an unrelated note, I did mark the Falcons as a loss in this game, and they came out with a big-time win. Outside of the Falcons, a very, very tight, and this makes for better football as well, a very tight standings in the NFL as we also look at the other side of the spectrum as outside of a few teams, Kansas City notably, everyone is in the thick at the halfway point of the year, which really makes for entertaining football. But for Kansas City, this year is just marked off as let's go on to next season. Starts off with the head man over there in KC, Romeo Crennel. Reportedly in a USA Today report coming out this morning, the coach for Kansas City, he's relieving himself as the defensive coordinator because he did split time as the head coach and as the defensive coordinator. He will just be a head coach as Gary Gibbs will take over the D coordinator. It seems like right now this head coach very desperate to try to save his career because he's had a very pedestrian career and tenure as a head coach in the NFL. Ever since taking care of the Chiefs in 2010, he's also been part of the Cleveland Browns since 2005. This coach has been 27-47. Very pathetic head coaching career. Now let's also mark that that Romeo Crennel has had very pathetic quarterbacks as well. Matt Castle being the last name on the list. But if Crennel doesn't turn it around, now this is very early to tell, but if he doesn't split a 500 record going into the end of the year, is Romeo Crennel back at the head coaching job next year, or will the Chiefs move on without him?
Well, here's a guy, you look at his resume as a head coach, you already read the numbers, 27-47, obviously not very impressive at all, but here's a guy who's been coaching to some degree since 1970, back when he was a defensive line coach at Western Kentucky. And here's a guy, as you said, he is trying to save his job. He's got a team who has yet to hold a lead in regulation of any game this season. Their lone win coming against the New Orleans Saints in overtime, the first time that they held a lead. And he's been even in the NFL since the 1980s. So here's a guy, his days, he's pretty much been any major coaching position you can think of, from special teams to defensive line to defensive coordinator, and of course head coaches at both Cleveland and Kansas City. Here's a guy who if he doesn't necessarily get a head coaching job, he will definitely be a coordinator, or he will have some sort of job, I would imagine, next season if things don't work out. I would be more surprised if he had no NFL profession going into next year.
And most notably,